Snow whispered like torn silk across the pines. The world was all white and silence, and the cabin stood in it like a scar that refused to heal. Smoke rose from its crooked chimney, thin as a dying man's breath. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Inside, Elias Crow sat hunched by the stove, sharpening his skinning knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The rhythm kept his thoughts at bay, the memories of screams of fire of blue-coated soldiers torn open on Cheyenne lances. They'd said he led them into the trap. They'd said his maps, his tracks, his words had brought death. No court-martial had come, only the whispers, and that was worse. So he climbed into the Bitterroot Mountains 3 winters ago, chasing solitude like a penance. Wind clawed at the cabin door. A low sound rose behind it, a thud soft but urgent. Elias froze, blade halfway drawn. He waited. The sound came again, heavier this time, then silence. He stood, boots creaking on the pine floor. The rifle came down from its hook with the ease of habit. When he pulled the door open, the storm spilled in like a beast breaking its tether. She lay crumpled at his threshold, dark hair plastered to her face, lips split from cold. One hand clutching the butt of a revolver, though her fingers trembled too badly to pull the trigger. Her belly was round beneath a ragged wool serape, unmistakable even through the snow. For a long, cold second, neither of them moved. Her eyes flickered open, black as obsidian and burning with something he couldn't name. Not fear, not entirely, something more defiant. A fire fighting to stay lit. "Help," she whispered, and the word broke in half. Then she collapsed forward, the revolver sliding from her grasp and vanishing into the snowdrift. Elias stood over her, rifle still half raised, breath frosting the air. She could be bait, a lure from bandits. Or worse, she could be one of the souls hunting him, carrying word of the bounty still hanging like a noose around his name. But as the wind howled through the doorframe, he saw her body shiver in violent spasms, and he thought of another night years ago when he'd seen a colt drown in mud, while cavalrymen rode past without slowing. He remembered how its eyes had looked, the same way hers did now. Damn it, he muttered and slung the rifle aside. He scooped her up, she weighed almost nothing, and carried her inside. The door slammed against the wind, shutting out the world. The cabin was one room of shadows and firelight. He laid her on the old buffalo hide near the stove, then stoked the flames until they roared. Her skin was clammy, her breath shallow. Her boots were soaked through. He stripped them off, fingers brushing half-frozen toes, then wrapped her feet in a wool blanket. When he pulled the serape back from her shoulders, he paused. Her belly moved, just barely, like the shift of wind through grass. The child was alive. Elias sat back on his heels, running a hand over the scar on his jaw. He'd not seen a pregnant woman this far into the high country since before the war. The wild didn't forgive life. It swallowed it. Her eyelids fluttered, and she tried to push herself upright. "Where am I?" "Bitterroot," he said. His voice sounded like gravel after days of silence. "You're safe. For now." She blinked, disoriented. Her voice came soft but steady. "You live alone." "I do." Her gaze roved over the rough-hewn walls, the stacked pelts, the single cot. When her eyes returned to his, there was no pleading in them, only the steel edge of someone who'd learned not to ask twice for mercy. "I won't stay," she said, though her body sagged against the blankets. Just needed to breathe. Elias gave her his canteen. She drank, hands shaking so violently that water ran down her chin. When she caught him watching, her mouth tightened in pride. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Marisol Vega." The syllables rolled soft and foreign in the dim cabin. He could almost hear the border dust in them, the sun-baked earth of places he'd left behind. She glanced at the rifle on the wall, then back at him. "If you mean to hand me over, wait till the baby's born." Elias stared at her. The words hit like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through his mind. Who was hunting her? What crime carried such desperation on its back? "Don't talk," he said finally, rising to fetch the stew pot. "You'll stay." "Till the storm's done." Her lips parted in surprise. Then she nodded, eyelids already drooping. Within minutes, she slept by the fire, breath shallow but steady. Elias sat at the table, knife forgotten beside him, watching the flames flicker on her face. Outside, the wind screamed across the mountain like the ghosts of the dead. He closed his eyes, but not to pray. He only whispered to no one. God help me. I let the storm in. The storm did not pass. It only deepened, swallowing the cabin in a world of white silence and groaning pines. Snow climbed the windows like a tide trying to bury them both alive. Elias' crow split kindling with the measured calm of a man who feared stillness more than cold. Every crack of the axe echoed through the one-room cabin like a shot. Behind him, Marisol Vega sat upright near the stove, wrapped in a blanket stitched from old cavalry coats. Her dark hair was braided back now, damp from melted snow. Her eyes followed him without apology. They had been trapped together 3 days. She had said almost nothing. Until tonight. Why did you help me? She asked, voice low, threaded with suspicion. Elias paused mid-swing. Seemed wrong to let you freeze. That's not an answer. He laid the axe aside and fed kindling into the stove. The flames licked up and painted her cheekbones in copper light. She sat cross-legged, hands on her swollen belly as if she were holding the world still by sheer will. You reminded me of something, he said at last. What? Something I failed to save. Her gaze lingered on him, sharp and assessing before drifting to the fire. Then maybe you saved the wrong one. That night, as the wind screamed across the ridges, they spoke again. Not like strangers, but like two ghosts who had wandered into the same ruin. Marisol told her story in pieces, as if testing whether the words would break her mouth. She had been born in the border town of Las Estrellas, daughter of a Mexican seamstress and a black Union soldier who vanished before she could remember him. She grew up catching snakes for bounty, breaking horses for scraps of bread, watching men spit the word half-breed like it was poison. At 16, she said, the white land baron Silas Gunn saw her walking home with a Comanche boy named Tahu. Gunn offered her work as a housemaid. When she refused, he offered marriage. When she refused again, he dragged her into the barn and locked the door. Her voice did not shake as she told Elias what she did next. How she found the revolver in Gunn's desk. How she walked back into the barn when he came for her again, belly full with Tahu's child. And how she shot him through the chest before he could touch her. The wind howled at the door like it wanted to get in. Elias said nothing for a long time. They'll hang you if they find you, he said finally. They hung Tahu, she replied, and her voice was as dry as the ashes in the hearth. They cut him down from the cottonwood tree at dawn, but I saw the sun hit his face. He died smiling. Her fingers curled protectively around her belly, and for the first time Elias saw the storm that lived inside her, not the snowstorm beyond the walls, but the one made of rage and grief that kept her upright. By the 4th day, the cabin felt smaller. The stove burned through their woodpile faster than he liked, so they worked in silence. He chopped. She mended torn boots with a curved needle and rawhide thread. Now and then she hummed something low and soft, maybe a lullaby, though it carried the sorrow of an old hymn. That evening he brought her a tin plate of beans and venison. She ate like a soldier, sparing nothing. When she caught him staring, she set her fork down slowly. What about you? She asked. Who did you kill to earn a cabin this far from God? Elias sat opposite her, elbows on knees. The lamplight carved the hollows of his face, showing the lines the world had carved there. I didn't kill anyone, he said. Not that time, her brow lifted. They sent me ahead as a scout, he went on. 50 men. Winter of 69. Colonel Riker led them into Cheyenne country to clear the plains. I told them the river pass was too narrow. They didn't listen. He swallowed, throat tight. The Cheyenne came down on them like thunder. I was the only one who walked away. And they blamed you, she said. They needed someone to blame. His voice cracked like dry wood, and I was still breathing. The room went quiet except for the hiss of the stove. Marisol's gaze softened, not pity but understanding. A different kind of scar recognizing its twin. You stayed alive, she said simply. That's the only crime. By the 5th night, their words had grown easier, like water finally finding the grooves in stone. Marisol proved sharp-witted, mocking his gruff silences. Laughing low when he muttered at the kettle, she asked about every rifle, every map pinned to the cabin wall, and recited names of constellations as she stared through the frost-slick glass. He found himself listening, drawn to the way her voice lingered on each name as though she were reclaiming something the world had tried to strip from her. Elias caught himself watching her smile when she thought he wasn't looking. It unsettled him more than any rifle muzzle ever had. That night she woke from a nightmare, breath ragged. He rose from the cot without thinking and brought her water. She accepted it without shame, then surprised him by asking, "If I make it through this, will you take me across the mountains?" He hesitated. "You know what waits on the other side? Towns full of men who think like Gunn." "I know," she said, "but this baby will be born breathing. I'll not bury him in snow." Something in her words struck deep, something fierce and bright. Elias thought of graves, too many, and of all the things he had buried in himself. He nodded once. "When the storm clears," he said, "I'll get you through." The sixth morning came without sun, only a pale gray glow through the snow-choked window. Elias stepped outside to cut more wood. The cold bit hard, but the air carried a strange stillness like the breath held before a shot. When he came back in, Marisol was sitting on the floorboards, her hands spread over her belly. She wasn't praying. She was whispering to the unborn child in Spanish, voice warm and steady. The sound wrapped through the cabin like smoke. Elias stood there longer than he meant to, listening. He had spent 3 winters in silence, waiting for his name to die with him. Now, he realized, the cabin no longer felt like a tomb. Snow slid from the roof in a sudden avalanche-like thud, breaking the moment. Marisol glanced up at him. Their eyes met, and neither of them looked away. For the first time in years, Elias almost smiled. Outside, the storm began to thin, just enough for the outline of distant peaks to emerge through the pale morning mist, sharp and indomitable as the hearts beating inside that fragile cabin. The snow stopped the way a wound finally stops bleeding, slowly, unwillingly. By morning, the peaks stood bare-shouldered against a pale blue sky, their crowns steaming where the sun struck them. Icicles cracked from the eaves like glass. The world had gone from white death to glittering silence. Elias Crow stepped out onto the porch and drew the first deep breath he had taken in months. The air bit like a knife, but it was alive. His boots sank only ankle-deep now, not to the knee. Somewhere far off, a raven called. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. Marisol emerged with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her belly full beneath her borrowed coat. Sunlight turned her hair to black fire. "So it ends," she murmured. "For now," Elias said. "Up here, winter's just a truce," she smiled faintly. "Then we best make use of it." They began with small things, gathering fallen limbs from beneath the pines, breaking ice from the creek to refill their barrels. He showed her where the rabbit runs threaded through the underbrush, and she crouched wordless beside him, reading the faint impressions in snow as if they were scripture. On the third day, she took his old rifle without asking and tracked a snowshoe hare for 1/2 mile. He expected her to miss. Instead, the crack of the shot echoed sharp and clean, and she returned with the animal hanging from her belt, eyes bright. Elias said nothing, just raised an eyebrow. She only smirked and set to skinning the hare on the porch rail. Later, by the fire, she told him Tahu had taught her how to walk silent on crusted snow, how to wait for breath to slow before pulling the trigger. She spoke his name without flinching, but her thumb traced the rifle stock like a memory. Elias listened, and something in his chest eased. She was not fragile. She was iron wrapped in velvet, and the world had mistaken her for breakable. They ranged farther each day, leaving the cabin like shadows slipping through pine. The high ridges opened around them, fields of white broken by black crags and the silver thread of frozen streams. They moved in rhythm without speaking. He carried wood, she carried snare wire. He scanned the slopes. She read the sky. One afternoon, they found wolf tracks crossing the ridge. Fresh. "Stay close," Elias said. "I am not a child." "I didn't say you were." That night, the wolves came. A low growl, then eyes in the dark just beyond the firelight. Elias rose slow, rifle ready, but Marisol was faster. She lifted the rifle from its post, knelt steady as stone, and fired. A gray shape yelped and vanished into the trees. The others melted back like smoke. Elias stared. Her hands were steady, her face calm. "You've done that before," he said. She handed the rifle back, eyes glinting. "Men are wolves, it's the same rule. Show fear and they eat you." The quiet between them changed after that. They still spoke little, but the silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like shelter. Elias caught himself waiting for her voice, even when she wasn't speaking. She teased him now and then, dry and sharp, calling him hermit, mocking his scorched biscuits, accusing him of talking to the mule more than to her. He found himself laughing, actual laughter, rusty in his throat, surprising them both. That night the wind returned, keening around the cabin, but inside the firelight was soft. Marisol sat cross-legged on the floor, rubbing her belly in slow circles. She spoke in Spanish to the unborn child, low and warm. The words curled through the room like smoke from sage. Elias sat at the table, sharpening his knife, and tried not to listen. But he did. Every word. He wondered what it would be like to hear a child laugh in this place. To wake to small feet on the boards instead of silence. The thought struck him like sunlight through ice, painful and bright. He looked away, heart-knocking. He had buried that part of himself in the snows years ago. It had no right to stir now. And yet Marisol finished her murmured lullaby and looked at him across the fire. Something unspoken passed in that glance, like the moment before two horses bolt from the same gate. "You look afraid," she said softly. "I am," Elias admitted. "Of me? Of what this could mean?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Only the crackle of the fire spoke for them. Then she nodded as if she understood too well. "This world doesn't make room for people like us," she said. "Not you, not me. Not him," she touched her belly. "They'd burn us down to warm their hands." Elias could not deny it. Towns remembered his name only to curse it. Men like him were not given families. They were given graves. And women like her were never allowed peace. Yet here they were, alive, breathing, sharing fire. The next morning, they climbed the ridge to scout the trail west. The snow lay thin and glittering like glass dust. Wind tugged at Marisol's braid and color rose in her cheeks. She walked with steady strength, one hand on her belly as if daring the world to stop her. At the summit, the whole Bitterroot Range unfurled around them, endless white peaks stabbing into a cobalt sky. Elias stood beside her, the cold stinging his lungs, and for a moment he let himself imagine. A cabin not of exile, but of choice. A life carved from silence, but not alone. Marisol turned to him. Her eyes were dark as thawing earth. "You're thinking something dangerous," she said. He almost smiled. "Maybe." They stood like that a long while, shoulder to shoulder, the wind streaming past them as if trying to erase their footprints. It could not. Not yet. Snowmelt dripped from the black brim of Elias Crow's hat as he stared down the crooked main street of the mining outpost. Wind slithered through the empty sluice channels, rattling the rusted tin roofs like the whisper of bones. The world had changed in their absence. Where once only wolves and wind dared roam, now stood a scatter of shacks, their plank walls shivering under the weight of gray skies. Men with hollow cheeks and hopeful eyes hunched over whiskey tables or leaned against hitching posts, staring at the newcomers as if they'd been carved out of some other world entirely. Elias walked beside Marisol, their steps slow, almost synchronized. She wore his old duster over her rounded belly, her dark hair braided tight against the mountain wind. Every glance they drew seemed sharper than the next. A white man marked as outcast. A woman neither fully white nor Comanche, heavy with life and defiance. They passed a cluster of nailed-up notices fluttering on the wall of the general store. One caught the air and froze Elias in his tracks, his name. Bold black letters. Elias Crow, traitor to the Union, wanted for the slaughter of the 5th Cavalry. Marisol stopped too, her gaze flicking from the poster to his face. She said nothing, but the silence carried more weight than accusation. Elias tore his eyes away and pushed open the store door. The air inside smelled of paraffin, old beans, and wet wool. Elias asked for flour, cartridges, and salt, his voice low, guarded. The shopkeeper's hands moved, but his eyes kept flitting to the poster outside like moths to fire. Marisol stood near the pot-bellied stove, warming her hands. For the first time since he had known her, she looked small, fragile even. The sight carved something hollow inside Elias. Then the door creaked and 3 men stepped in. Their boots thudded against the warped boards, measured, predatory. The tallest one carried a scar down his cheek like a slash of dried riverbed. His gaze fixed on Marisol. "Well, I'll be damned," the scarred man said. "Vega." Marisol's shoulders stiffened. Her hand brushed the grip of the revolver hidden in Elias's coat. "She's wanted," the man continued, voice a dry rasp. "Killed a land baron back in Santa Fe. My employers want her brought back, alive if possible, but breathing's optional." The air seemed to crack like ice. Elias's knuckles whitened on the counter edge. They dragged Elias outside, away from her, to the edge of the boardwalk. The scarred man pulled a folded paper from his coat, A governor's letter embossed with a red seal. "You're Elias Crow," he said quietly. "The Butcher Scout. They say you lured good soldiers into a Comanche trap, then vanished with their supply gold." "That's a lie," Elias murmured. "Maybe. But lies die slow out here. This says you get a pardon, your name cleared, your land back." He held the paper closer. "All you do is hand her over." Wind rose, carrying grit from the street, stinging Elias's eyes. The paper trembled like a living thing in his hand. He could almost feel the weight of a life restored. His father's ranch deeded back, his name whispered with respect instead of contempt. "She's not yours to protect," the scarred man said. "And you know what the world does to people like her." Elias stood still for so long the silence felt like judgment. When he came back inside, Marisol was gone. The stove glowed cold. Only her braid ribbon lay coiled on the floor like shed skin. He found her at the livery stable, saddling his mare with trembling hands. Her eyes glimmered in the lantern light, defiant but wet. "I won't let you damn yourself for me," she said. "You were someone before this. You can be again." The world seemed to tilt. Elias stepped closer, slow, like approaching a wounded animal. "And you think leaving makes it right? You think I could just go back to the ashes they left me?" "I think it's your only chance," she whispered. He saw then what she truly believed, that love was always borrowed time, especially for women like her. That his choosing her could only end in ruin. The scarred man waited by the hitching rail, the governor's pardon still folded in his palm. Elias strode up to him, every step loud as a gunshot. "I've made my choice," he said. Before the man could speak, Elias snatched the parchment, struck a match on the post, and set the letter ablaze. The paper curled and blackened, sparks drifting into the cold wind like fireflies fleeing judgment. "Tell your masters," Elias said, voice raw. "We'll survive together or not at all." The scarred man's face hardened, then cracked with dark amusement. "Then you've signed your grave." He swung into the saddle and rode out, his men trailing like shadows swallowed by the dusk. Night fell like a closing fist. Elias and Marisol rode hard up the mountain path, snow crunching beneath the hooves. No words passed between them until the cabin lights flickered in sight again, dim against the stars. She finally spoke, her voice a thin thread in the wind. "They'll never stop coming." "Then let them come," Elias said. "They'll find two ghosts, not one." Marisol turned her face toward him. Her eyes glimmered, not with fear, but something fiercer, something alive. Inside, the cabin fire danced low, casting long shadows across the walls. Elias sat by the hearth, Marisol curled against his chest. Her hand rested over the quiet rise of her unborn child. Outside, snow began again, sifting down like ashes on a forgotten grave, yet inside warmth breathed, fragile and real. The first shot shattered the cabin window just as the wind howled down from Bitterroot Ridge, scattering sparks from the hearth like fleeing fireflies. Elias Crow froze, rifle halfway to his shoulder. Outside, through the swirling white, shadowed figures slipped between the pines, their lanterns bobbing like eyes in the dark. The snowstorm had swallowed the mountain, muffling hoofbeats and breath, yet somehow their enemies had climbed through it. Marisol was crouched near the hearth, eyes wide, one hand braced on her swollen belly. "They found us," she whispered. "They were always coming," Elias said, voice steady though his blood hammered. He dragged the heavy table across the door as another bullet chewed splinters from the wall. Smoke curled from the lamp. Outside, the wind screamed like the mountain itself disapproved of what was about to happen. They moved like they'd been training for this forever. Elias dumped powder on the windowsill, rigged the doorway with a tripwire tied to a sharpened stake. Marisol stacked wood against the gaps, her face pale but fierce, breath misting in sharp bursts. "They'll try to burn us out," Elias muttered. "Then we burn them first," she said, and he almost smiled at the fire in her voice. Snow hammered the roof, mingling with the faint smell of sulfur from Elias's powder horn. He loaded his last 6 cartridges and laid them in a neat row. When he glanced at her, she was gripping the revolver with both hands, jaw set hard. Outside, the scarred man's voice cut through the storm like a knife. "Bring me the woman, Crow. You won't live till dawn." Elias answered by firing through the door. A scream echoed in the dark. They came in waves, dark shapes darting through white squalls, firing from behind stumps and rocks. Elias picked them off with the precision of old instincts reborn. One man dropped in the snow, staining it black. Another rushed the porch and met Elias's boot, cracking bone on wood. Marisol reloaded for him between contractions she tried to hide, but he saw the tremor in her fingers. Between volleys, silence fell, thick, waiting. Then fire. A bottle of kerosene smashed against the wall, flames licking up the logs. Elias grabbed a pail, doused it, coughing through smoke. The baby's cradle sat in the corner, untouched and empty. It felt like a promise and a threat. She screamed once, sharp and guttural, as pain seized her. The sound froze Elias colder than the wind. "It's starting," she gasped. Sweat ran down her temple despite the cold. "It's too soon." Elias knelt, torn between battle and blood, heart splitting. "Marisol, you can't. I don't get to choose," she bit out, teeth bared. Another shot splintered the window above them. He dragged her behind the bed, laid the revolver at her side, and stood. "Hold them off," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'll hold on." He touched her cheek, brief, desperate, then stepped back into the line of fire. The front door exploded inward under a ram. Snow gusted through the smoke. Elias fired once, twice, men dropped, but more came. A bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Blood slicked his sleeve, hot and numbing. He stumbled up, swinging his rifle like a club. "Wood-cracked skull," someone screamed. Then the scarred man pushed through the doorframe. Revolver raised, eyes burning with triumph. Behind Elias, Marisol cried out, not in pain but fury. The last shot rang like thunder. The scarred man's chest snapped backward. The light gone from his eyes before he hit the floorboards. Marisol stood behind the bed, both hands gripping the revolver, smoke curling from the barrel. Then she collapsed onto her knees, clutching her belly as another contraction ripped through her. Flames roared up the cabin wall. Their oil lamp had fallen, glass shattered. Smoke poured low and black. Elias staggered to her side, lifting her as the roof timbers groaned above. "We can't stay," he rasped. "I can't walk." "Then I'll carry you." He wrapped her in his coat, cradling her against his good shoulder. The cabin door hung open, snow swirling through the burning ruin like white ghosts. The smell of scorched pine and gunpowder filled their lungs as they stumbled into the storm. The last of the men fled at the sight of their burning stronghold collapsing behind them, its embers devoured by the blizzard. Elias didn't look back. They vanished into the Bitterroot night. Two broken souls, one bleeding, the other bringing forth life. Both swallowed by snow that erased every footprint behind them. Above, the storm raged like judgment. Ahead, only darkness and the whisper of hope. In the black hollow of the trees, Elias sank to his knees, holding her close as she trembled with the rhythm of birth. Her breath mingled with his, and for a fleeting moment the world felt suspended, quiet, waiting to see if they would survive. Snow fell like ash, and still they clung to each other. At dawn, the plains stretched endless and white, the sun rising like a pale coin above the horizon. Smoke from the Lakota winter camp rose in thin, quiet columns, carrying the scent of cedar and thawed earth. Inside a hide tent warmed by a low fire, Marisol cradled a small, swaddled life against her chest. The baby's breath puffed like mist, fragile yet stubborn. Elias sat near the entrance, his arm still bound from the siege, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting for ghosts. When Marisol stirred, he looked at her. In the glow of the fire, exhaustion carved deep shadows across her face. But there was steel there, too, the quiet kind that had carried her through snow, bullets, and blood. "You're staring," she murmured, "making sure I'm awake," he said softly. "Feels like a dream." Marisol smiled faintly, then placed the baby in his arms. Elias hesitated before taking the child, but when he did, something loosened in him. His breath caught, and for a long moment the only sound was the fire and the baby's slow, even sigh. A cry shattered the quiet, the high, sharp sound of a child outside the camp. Elias rose instantly, setting the baby back in Marisol's arms, and ran toward the sound. Down near the river, a Lakota boy had slipped through the thin ice. The current dragged him under, small hands clawing at the air before vanishing beneath. Elias didn't think. He dove, the water biting like knives. The cold struck his wounded shoulder, nearly sending him under, but he caught the boy's tunic, hauling him up through the jagged hole. They collapsed together on the bank, coughing, shivering, alive. When Elias looked up, the Lakota hunters stood at the ridge, watching. Their silence was not cold. It was considering. That night, the elders invited Elias into the council tent. Smoke coiled around them as they listened to his story, not just of the ambush, but of what he had chosen at the mining outpost, of the pardon he burned. When he finished, the oldest man nodded once. "You have paid your debt," he said simply. When Elias returned to Marisol, she knew without words. She reached out her hand and he took it, sitting beside her in the snow while the northern lights shimmered faintly above them. In the weeks that followed, word traveled with the traders and riders. The traitor of Bitterroot Ridge had stood against a dozen men to protect a woman and her unborn child. Some said he was shot dead and rose again. Others said the woman herself struck down the posse like a spirit of vengeance. Elias and Marisol never corrected the stories. The truth was their own, too fragile and too sacred to lay bare. By the time the passes cleared, the cabin was long ash behind them, and the world ahead was open. Elias saddled the bay gelding they had bartered for, lifting Marisol gently into the saddle with the baby at her breast. The wind swept the prairie, carrying away the last of the winter snow in glinting veils. The sun struck their faces as Elias mounted and rode alongside her, their shadows stretching long behind them. "Where now?" she asked quietly. "Anywhere but back," he said. They rode on, leaving no trail but the echo of hooves and the soft hum of a lullaby Marisol sang to the child. As the sun dipped low, the three of them became silhouettes against a horizon burning gold. The land felt wide enough to hold them at last, as though the west itself had made room for their survival. The wind caught Elias's hat, carried it a few feet, and he let it go. The man he had been, the shamed scout, the outcast, was gone. What remained was a father, a partner, and a man who had chosen to live. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're listening from.